How many of the people in your life today would still be there if you had never given them anything in return? Don't answer yet. Sit with that question for a moment. Let it settle. Because there's something in it that feels uncomfortable, and that discomfort is exactly the starting point of everything we're going to talk about today. Think about your week, about the messages you replied to without really wanting to, the plans you accepted unwillingly, the conversations you kept going because staying silent would have felt awkward. Think about that Thursday meeting that dragged on an hour longer than it should have, that Saturday dinner where you smiled at the right moments, said the right things, laughed at the right jokes, and then you got home, sat on the couch, and felt something hard to name, not exactly sadness, something closer to emptiness, as if you had been out all day and hadn't actually gone anywhere. That feeling has a name, but no one has given it to you yet. And when you discover it, it's going to change the way you see almost everything you do. Let's start with something that's going to sound harsh, but that you need to hear. Most of your social life wasn't chosen, it was inherited. Your first friendships happened because you lived in the same neighborhood, because you went to the same school, because your parents knew each other at some neighborhood gathering. Later, in high school, you grouped together out of pure survival, because rejection hurts, and the teenage brain will literally do anything to avoid it. Then, in university or at work, the logic was the same as always. You're here, I'm here. We see each other every day, so let's grab a drink. It wasn't a choice. It was social gravity. The silent physics of bodies orbiting each other, not because they are truly drawn together, but because neither has enough energy to escape the orbit. And the most disturbing part of all this, the thing no one says out loud at those Saturday dinners, is this. Most of the people you spend your time with don't know you. They know you performing. They know you wearing the mask. And the most unsettling part is that you yourself can't quite remember the last time you took it off. You're not even sure what's underneath anymore. Right now, as you read this, a part of you might want to reject it, to tell yourself no, that your friends are real, that your relationships are genuine, that this doesn't apply to you. And you might be right. You might be one of the few people who have built authentic bonds. But even if that's the case, the question still stands. How long has it been since you were completely alone? Not just without physical company, truly alone. No background music, no phone within reach, no noise filling the silence before the silence has a chance to say something. Because there's something in that silence that is frightening. Something most people have been avoiding for years without even realizing they're avoiding it. And that automatic escape mechanism, so ingrained that we don't even notice it anymore, is the core of everything we're exploring today. There is an experiment that forever changed the way psychology understands the relationship between human beings and their own minds. It was conducted by Timothy Wilson, a researcher at the University of Virginia, just over a decade ago. The design was brutally simple. They took a group of people and placed them in an empty room. No phone, no books, no music, no objects, just a chair and 4 white walls. The only instruction was to sit there with their own thoughts for 15 minutes. 15 minutes, the time it takes to play a song 3 times. The results were so unsettling that the team repeated the experiment with different groups to make sure it wasn't a mistake. The finding was confirmed every time. 2/3 of the male participants and 1/3 of the women chose to administer electric shocks to themselves rather than continue sitting in silence. There was a device in the room they could activate voluntarily, and they activated it. They chose real, deliberate physical pain over mental stillness. Pause there for a moment. Pain, physical, voluntary, instead of silence. What does that tell us? What is inside the minds of most people that is so unbearable that the body would rather suffer than face it? Because this isn't a statistical anomaly, it's a pattern. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably recognize in that pattern something you do too, just in softer and more socially acceptable forms. Opening Instagram the moment there's a second of silence. Playing a podcast while cooking so you don't have to be alone with your thoughts. Looking for someone to talk to anyone when stillness starts to feel too heavy. I'm not telling you this to judge you. I'm telling you because understanding that mechanism is what separates people who truly live from those who simply drift through life. There's a philosopher who saw this more clearly than anyone else, and he did it almost 200 years ago, without brain scans or laboratory studies, just with a power of observation so sharp it's still uncomfortable to read today. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer, and he had a way of describing people who socialize out of fear of solitude that is so precise it hurts. He said that human beings behave like hedgehogs in winter. When the cold comes, they move closer to each other seeking warmth. But as soon as they get too close, their spines hurt each other. So they move apart, and get cold again, and move closer again. Their whole lives like this, in a constant back and forth, searching for a distance that is never quite right. Not so close that it hurts, not so far that they freeze. But what Schopenhauer pointed out most bluntly was this. Most people don't seek company because they truly desire it. They seek it because they don't know how to exist without it. Because their own silence produces an anxiety they have no tools to manage, and a person who needs others to escape themselves cannot, by definition, build real relationships. They can only build relationships that function as anesthesia. Think of it this way. Imagine you have a friend who only calls you when they're going through a hard time, who shows up in your life when they need distraction, and disappears when they're fine. Would you call that friendship? Probably not. Well, when we socialize to avoid being alone with ourselves, we are exactly that friend. We use others in the same way, as a distraction from something we don't want to face. And now comes the hardest part to accept. When someone has been functioning like this for years, something happens inside them that is silent and absolutely devastating. They stop knowing who they are when no one is watching. Identity is built, brick by brick, in the reflection of others. What you say depends on who is listening. What you think changes depending on who you don't want to contradict. What you feel gets buried under layers and layers of what you're supposed to feel in order to keep belonging, to keep being accepted, so that no one thinks you're strange. And one day you wake up and look in the mirror, and there's someone there you don't fully recognize. Not completely. There's something in that face that escapes you, a kind of strangeness, as if you were looking at someone you haven't seen in a very long time. That's not a cinematic existential crisis. It's not something that only happens to people with serious problems. It's the predictable, almost mathematical result of years of giving your attention, your time, and your energy to everyone except yourself. It's what happens when you build an entire life outward and leave the inner world completely neglected. Psychology has a name for what you lose in that process. It calls it the sense of self. And when it erodes, when it fades away through constant social performance and external validation, the person that remains is not free. They are dependent. They need others to constantly confirm that they exist, that they matter, that they're on the right path. And that need, that constant hunger for approval, is one of the most effective forms of prison that exists, because it has no visible bars, only habits. Now I want you to think about something specific. Think about the last important decision you made. A job change, a relationship, a personal project. How much of that decision was truly yours? How much was influenced by what others would think, by what is considered normal, by the fear of not fitting in, of disappointing, of being left out? I'm not asking you to say it out loud, just to be honest with yourself in this moment, because there is an enormous difference between living from your own values and living to meet others' expectations. And that difference, which may sound philosophical and abstract on paper, translates into something very concrete in everyday life. Whether you go to bed feeling whole or feeling empty, whether the things you do belong to you or you simply do them for others to see. And this is where something comes into play that modern society has achieved with terrifying effectiveness, turning solitude into a flaw. If you're alone, something is wrong. If you don't have plans on a Saturday, it means no one cares about you enough. If you prefer staying home reading instead of going to that gathering you secretly find boring, you have a socialization problem that needs fixing. Social media amplifies this to the extreme. We see everyone constantly in motion, always surrounded by people, always somewhere amazing, always holding a drink with a perfect smile. And the brain? which doesn't distinguish well between what it sees and what is real, begins to interpret its own stillness as a sign of failure. But there's something those images never show you. You never see the moment after, when everyone leaves, and the person who seemed so full of life is alone with their phone, looking for the next plan. You never see Sunday morning when that same person doesn't know what to do with themselves if nothing is scheduled. You never see the silent anxiety of someone who has spent years running from themselves so skillfully they don't even realize they're running anymore. The social pressure pushing us toward constant group life is not neutral, it has interests. The entertainment industry needs you distracted. Social media needs you connected. The attention economy needs you to never stay still long enough to question whether what you're consuming has any real value for your life. Because a person who learns to be alone, to think in silence, to truly know themselves, is much harder to manipulate. And for certain interests, that's dangerous. Now I want to talk to you about something science has been studying for decades, and which radically contradicts the message popular culture has been feeding you for just as long. Chosen solitude, conscious introspection, real time with yourself, not only does not harm mental health, it improves it in ways no social interaction can replicate. The default mode network is one of the most fascinating structures of the human brain. It activates precisely when you're not doing anything external, when you're not responding to stimuli, when you're not interacting with the environment, when you're simply within yourself. For decades, neuroscientists believed this resting activity was just noise, something unimportant the brain did while waiting for the next task. They were completely wrong. Research from the last 2 decades has shown that the default mode network is where some of our most sophisticated cognitive functions take place. Deep self-awareness, genuine empathy for others, long-term planning, creativity, the ability to make sense of past experiences and extract meaning from them. All of that happens there, in that inner space that many people never inhabit because they are always too busy looking outward. And there's something even more unsettling. When we spend too much time in constant social interaction, in continuous external stimulation, that network doesn't get enough rest. It doesn't consolidate, and the functions that depend on it weaken. Creativity declines. The ability to make truly autonomous decisions diminishes. Empathy, paradoxically, also deteriorates, because real empathy requires that introspective capacity that only exists in silence. In other words, the less time you spend with yourself, the less you know yourself. And the less you know yourself, the worse you relate to others. Not better, worse. Now I'm going to tell you something about friendship that probably no one has told you this way. Most friendships are not built on mutual understanding. They are built on habit, on proximity, on shared experiences that create the illusion of a bond without requiring real understanding. You can spend 10 years seeing someone every week and not know anything essential about how they think, what truly scares them, what they sacrifice to be where they are, what they're carrying without telling anyone. And this is not that person's fault. It's the result of a type of socialization that systematically avoids depth, because depth is uncomfortable. Depth requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, in most social contexts, is penalized. Not necessarily with cruelty, with something more subtle, uncomfortable silence, changing the subject, the joke that dissolves the tension before the conversation reaches anything real. So we learn to stay on the surface, to talk about shows, work, gossip, travel, to build a social life that has all the right ingredients and none of the real nutrients. A life that looks full from the outside but leaves that taste I described at the beginning on the inside. That hard-to-name emptiness. Schopenhauer said that the ordinary person is oriented outward, toward what they can see, toward what others think of them. The person of genius, on the other hand, is oriented inward, toward their own world of ideas and perceptions. He didn't say this to glorify intelligence over socialization. He said it to point out something far more precise, that a person's depth is directly related to the quality of their inner life, and that a rich inner life can only be cultivated in solitude. Humanity's greatest creations were not born in group meetings. Isaac Newton developed calculus and the law of universal gravitation during the quarantine Cambridge imposed on him during the bubonic plague of 1665. Alone, in his countryside home, with no one to socialize with, Charles Darwin wrote in solitude for hours every day, with almost monastic discipline. Albert Einstein acknowledged that his best ideas came in moments of stillness, when he allowed himself to wander within his own mind, without the pressure to produce or respond. Coincidence? No. A necessary condition. Creativity. Real creativity. Not the kind that simply recombines existing ideas in slightly different ways, but the kind that produces something genuinely new, requires a mental state that is incompatible with constant social interaction. It requires what psychologists call incubation, that invisible process that occurs when the brain works in the background, without pressure, without external stimuli competing for its resources. That process can only happen in silence, in solitude. In that space, most people compulsively fill with noise before it has a chance to do its work. But there's more. Something that has to do with who you are when no one is watching. There is a psychological phenomenon researchers call de-individuation. It occurs when a person becomes so immersed in a group that their sense of individuality dissolves. In extreme contexts, de-individuation leads to behaviors people would never adopt on their own. That's why crowds can do things none of their members would do individually. But in much more ordinary and subtle ways, de-individuation happens in any stable social group. When you spend enough time in the same circle, you adopt its values as if they were your own. Its judgments become your moral compass. Its fears shape yours. Its ambitions define the limits of what you allow yourself to desire. And the most unsettling part is that this happens without anyone consciously imposing it on you. No one tells you what to think. The group simply has a kind of cultural gravity that slowly reorients your perception, so gradually that you never experience it as a loss. If you made it to the end, comment "I made it," and I'll personally reply to you. And if it resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this, and give it a like if you enjoyed it. See you next time.